Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'll be talking to you about our project, Teaching Strategies and the Role of Educator Attributions for Autistic Students. A lot of my experience working with autistic individuals is with early intervention, particularly in the school setting. In terms of quality of life, we know that the school experience is important for autistic students, and the social experience at school can be very challenging. For instance, we know that autistic students self-report worse peer relationships than their non-autistic peers, which can include increased feelings of loneliness and isolation. This also isn't restricted to peer interactions either, as many autistic students report complicated interactions with adults at the school. Some autistic students report that adults can be helpful with the support that they provide. However, their interactions with adults often also highlight how different they are from their non-autistic peers. As an early interventionist working in the schools, these social challenges are something that I think we can help support by targeting key developmental skills in play, social communication, and joint engagement. For young autistic students, developing functional and symbolic play will give them the skills to play with their peers and join in that social context. Within that social context, it's important that we work on building social communication skills, like joint attention through the use of gestures and language. Ultimately, students can use play and social communication skills to jointly engage with their peers, becoming active participants in a shared activity. For many young autistic students, this is an important goal in establishing and developing key skills in the school environment. In the school setting, educators can play an important role helping to develop these skills by using specific strategies to support joint engagement for their autistic students. These strategies can include things like setting up clear opportunities to engage with their peers. Thinking about the environment and how environmental strategies can help promote developmentally appropriate play, social communication, and engagement. In our case, thinking about the toys in a preschool classroom or the positioning of the students. This idea of following the child's lead, so knowing that the children are already motivated by certain activities or toys, and how can we best support those ideas? And supporting those ideas through building and establishing play routines. So getting the kids into a routine that they can then actively share with a play partner, whether it be the educator or their peers, and then expanding on those routines to extend that time and promote more social communication and joint engagement. Educators can also make sure to incorporate joint attention within their interactions. So using the joint attention gestures, like pointing things out and showing them to the students, and also using joint attention language by commenting on what's going on the different objects around and within the activity, and also providing opportunities for the students to use these joint attention gestures and language with the educator and the peers. And finally, matching their language to the developmental level of the child. Again, going back to the idea of what is the child already doing, can we match that, and how can we support that? These strategies altogether are all a part of the naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention known as JASPER. JASPER specifically targets the development of social communication, play, and joint engagement for autistic children, and has been shown to be effective when implemented by teachers in their classrooms. When we think about how educators can support students with strategies like those from JASPER, it's also important to consider what set of views and beliefs educators bring to the table. This is important because educator perceptions matter and can influence the way educators interact with their autistic students. Some things we want to consider could be how educators view their students' abilities and their autism-related behaviors. More specifically, how much control do the students have over their own behavior, and if the behavior itself is something that's stable or more malleable. And how educators attribute the behaviors of autistic students may influence the strategies they use when they're interacting with them. So this leads us to our current study, and it led to two important questions. Our first question was, how do educators perceive the behaviors of their autistic students? We hypothesized that educators would view students with more cognitive ability as having more control over their behavior. So students with more abilities would have more effortful control over the behaviors that are more associated with autism. Our second question was, are these perceptions associated with the educator's use of engagement strategies? So thinking about those lists of strategies that I went through earlier that are designed to promote engagement, we hypothesized that educators would use more engagement strategies if they perceive their autistic student as being in more control over their behavior. So if the autistic student was perceived to have more effort for control over the behaviors that are related to autism, then the teacher would be more likely to use these engagement strategies with them. To answer these questions, we looked at a previous trial of Jasper implemented in preschool classrooms and ran a secondary data analysis to look at how educator perceptions might influence their behavior when playing with their students. In the original trial, educators were trained to implement Jasper during small group play within their classrooms. For this study, we looked at key variables from before the educators received Jasper training to see what the educators were already doing. Prior to training, we asked the educators to rate their autistic students on how well they can control their autistic-related behaviors. So this produced a controllability score for each student. We also asked educators to play with the students for 10 minutes to see what strategies they're already using, and based on those lists of strategies that I had listed earlier. For the students, we also administered a cognitive assessment, the Mullen Scales of Early Learning, in order to determine their nonverbal IQ, and the ADOS-2, which provides a comparison score to provide us an indicator of the amount of autism-related behaviors observed in the child. And just to reiterate, our primary analyses really looked at what was going on before the educators received Jasper training to really see what was going on with what the teachers and the educators are already doing with their students. So what we found was that these controllability ratings were in fact related to important child characteristics, specifically their nonverbal IQ and the ADOS comparison scores. Students with higher cognitive abilities, as determined by their nonverbal IQ, and lower ADOS comparison scores, so lower frequency or lower observations, less observations of those autism-related behaviors, were rated higher in their ability to control these autistic-related behaviors. So based on those findings, we see that educators were perceiving their autistic students in different ways, and it was related to both cognitive ability and autism-related behaviors. Next, we wanted to see if these controllability ratings predicted the engagement strategies educators used when playing with their students. And we found that they did. Educators tended to use more joint engagement strategies for the students they rated as having more control over their ASD-related behaviors. This meant they were using more strategies, like setting up those opportunities to engage with peers, using some of those environmental strategies to promote that engagement, appropriate play, and social communication, following the child's lead, so identifying what the kids are doing, about how the children are already interacting with the toys and how they best can support that, using joint attention during the interactions, and matching their language to the developmental language of the children. But they were using more of these strategies for the students they perceived as more in control of their behavior. So that was important, as we know that there are students that they were rating with less control, and so they were likely using fewer of these strategies. So we want to take a step further and look at this. We want to see how persistent this idea was. So this led us to some exploratory analyses, and we decided to look at how these perceptions influence strategies after the educators received Jasper training. And what we found was that there was no significant relationship. So for the educators that learned Jasper, previous perceptions about their autistic students were not related to their ability to implement Jasper after receiving training. So this is important as we think about how to best support educators going forward and thinking about how some of these early perceptions influence their behaviors. So to review our findings, we started out looking at what educators were doing before receiving JASPER training, an intervention designed to teach engagement strategies. And we found that educators tended to use more engagement strategies for the students that they rated as having more control over the ASD-related behavior. Our findings connect these causal attributions or these perceptions made by educators with the actual behaviors or strategies that they're using with their students. So it may be, and we found that students in better control of their behavior may be in a state where they are ready to engage with others around them. And it may be that educators recognize this and are actively using more engagement strategies, knowing that. However, educators were less likely to use engagement strategies for students with more profound delays. In this case, it may be that educators are prioritizing different skills, managing other behaviors, or may feel less comfortable engaging with these students. While these findings alone are important, they tell us that teachers and students with more profound delays may need more support. So this leads us to our exploratory findings and how they can help provide some important information on what we can do going forward. So for the educators that learned JASPER, previous perceptions about their autistic students were not related to their ability to implement JASPER. Educators were able to implement the strategies at high fidelity, regardless of their previous causal attributions. We think this is significant for a couple of reasons. If you think about JASPER, we know that it emphasizes environmental and teacher strategies to support engagement. So providing more of those strategies or giving teachers a structure and a protocol with which to use these different engagement enhancing strategies. It also helps educators identify developmentally appropriate targets and strategies, which can help educators work with a range of skills and abilities. So thinking about those kids with more profound delays, it's possible that learning JASPER empowered educators to use some of the strategies that they already have or add in some of the new strategies that they learned and were able to use them for a wider range of students. So they were better able to help not just the students they perceived as more in control of the behaviors, but also the students that were in less control of the behaviors. So in conclusion, we want to highlight some important next steps. We encourage more professional development for educators working with autistic children. So this is something we hear from many professionals working with autistic students in the US and continues to be a need. This idea that the training that they receive before going out into the field is not sufficient to address the full scope of needs of autistic children. However, we also know that many educators have effective strategies, but may need support to address the various needs of autistic students. Again, thinking about the great heterogeneity of autistic students and the varied skills that they have and the varied challenges that they present depending on that heterogeneity. Training can help teachers overcome barriers to using effective strategies for all their students. So autistic students have such varied needs and supports, and it's a challenge for educators to be able to meet those varied needs. But we do see that training can help that and can help alleviate some of those concerns for these educators and give them some of the strategies that they need to support the full range of kids. Okay, so thank you again for the opportunity to share our work, and thank you to all the people that supported this project. If you'd like to learn more about the larger trial the study is based on, I'll provide a citation below. It's called Preschool Deployment of Evidence-Based Social Communication Intervention, JASPER in the Classroom. Thank you again, and goodbye.